Okay. My co-moderators and I have designed Clinical Trials OBQ, One Burning Question, for clinical trialists, pharma, and biotech industry professionals, and patients and patient advocates interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. We hold these sessions monthly, and you can look forward to the recording and the summary at the end that we will be posting to LinkedIn. Now I'll turn the mic over to my co-moderator, Michael Young, to introduce himself, our sponsor, and lead into this month's OBQ. There you go, Michael.
Thanks, Sophie. Appreciate that. And just looking around the room here, we've got an assembly of really outstanding people, not only on the panel, but in the audience. I see some really outstanding professionals there. So welcome to this. My name is Michael Young. I'm a life science C-suite consultant working at the intersection of clinical strategy and commercialization. And I support this platform sponsor, Consuli.net. For those who don't know Consuli, let me give you just a brief overview so that if you wish to engage with them, that you'll have the opportunity. Broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company, it's a B Corp, with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. We're all about making sure that people can get compensated for the data and the information that they share. Experts suggest that our individual health data is worth somewhere around $20,000 per person per year. Consuli helps people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, gets them paid for their data. We can make medicine better through this process and build a better community. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members, and where Consuli becomes their agent. Members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from Consuli for opportunities including the ability to participate in clinical trials and data trials. So there's no cost to join the Consuli movement. You can learn more at Consuli.net. That's CONSULI.net. This month, basically because of a lot of the activity that's going on with regard to automation and standardization of processes, we've gotten together with really a couple of the best experts that we could find, and today you're going to hear from one of them. And so I am very, very pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Raymond Nomizu from CRIO, and here he is to discuss the overall one burning question that we have, which is site technology the most important key to patient safety, data quality, and cost savings in today's clinical trial environment? Raymond?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Raymond Nomizu, co-founder of and CEO of CRIO. We're an e-clinical solution provider for research sites, sponsors, and CROs. Today, over 2,000 research sites around the world use CRIO for electronic source data collection and other tools. All trials, whether traditional, hybrid, or virtual, operate through research sites. Historically, sites have been viewed primarily as sources of patients, with sponsors and CROs providing top-down study management, including the selection of technologies. But there have been two related trends occurring in the site world, and together they're opening up huge possibilities for the industry. First, sites are consolidating into larger and more sophisticated networks. In the last 5 years, at least 20 institutional and strategic investors have poured billions of dollars into acquiring existing sites or operationalizing new ones. These networks offer sponsors and CROs a single point of contact across multiple PIs, and many networks today are large enough to field an entire phase 2 trial. Soon, some will be able to field a phase 3 global trial. Second, these networks are adopting sophisticated 21 CFR 11 compliant e-clinical technologies that automate the clinical trial workflow at the site level, most notably e-source, e-regulatory, and e-consent. We estimate that today, 20% of U.S. sites have already adopted eSource, and an even higher percent have adopted eRegulatory. I predict that in 5 years, 50% of U.S. sites will be fully eClinical enabled. As these site-facing technologies mature and become ubiquitous, they have the potential to revolutionize clinical trials by driving significant gains in data quality, protocol compliance, patient safety, and trial efficiency. In fact, they are already starting to replace some of the existing sponsor-based technologies. Why do I say that? Because site-based technologies operate differently from historical sponsor-based technologies. Site-based technologies work on the site's terms. They become operationalized, meaning site staff are already trained and using them at scale. There is no learning curve. But more importantly, because they operate at the site level, they embed protocol compliance, data quality, and patient safety up front at the point of capture. By doing so, they reduce the need for secondary data entry, source data verification, and data cleanup. They free up significant time for both the site and the CRO responsible for oversight. This freed up time can be reinvested into patient recruitment, retention, and improved experience. Let's focus on eSource as an example and how eSource could replace the EDC. As you know, sites are responsible for collecting data for protocol. When the sites collect data while doing study-related procedures, that data constitutes source data. The sites then transcribe certain values from the source data into the sponsor's EDC system. Most sponsors haven't given a lot of thought to exactly how the sites are collecting the source data, but if you stop to think about it, that data collection process is where the success of the trial resides. If the data is collected properly at source, then the sponsor will have desired protocol compliance and clean data. If the data is not collected properly at source, then the result will be protocol deviations, unreliable, even discarded data, and delays in closing the study. How have sites historically collected the source data? The answer may surprise you. They've historically used paper charts. They read and interpret the protocol, which is often 100 pages long, with very detailed instructions on how the data is to be collected. Then translate that protocol into worksheets so they have the specific steps, the data to be completed by hand. That means if a sponsor has 20 sites on the trial, each of those 20 sites will be separately interpreting the protocol and designing their own worksheets to execute the protocol. Do you think they do this reliably and accurately each time? Of course not. They make mistakes. They interpret the protocol differently. They often write templates in a way that bakes deviations into the process. So the moment the sponsor sends a protocol to multiple sites, the sponsor has created protocol deviations. But it gets worse. When the site is ready to conduct a visit, they print out the source worksheets and complete them by hand. And when they do, they make mistakes against their own worksheets. They miss certain fields. They don't follow their own branching logic. They write the wrong date down. So now you've got paper templates that are themselves inconsistent and often wrong, and the data collected against those templates are also erroneous and incomplete. Then the site transcribes this data into the EDC, and more problems occur. Sites are often late doing this, or they fill in some sections of the EDC but not the others, or they make transcription errors. What this means is the sponsor cannot automatically rely on EDC to be a complete and accurate representation of the source data, nor do the sponsors have direct access to the source data itself to know if that data was collected properly. Therefore, sponsors employ CRAs to fly on site to do two separate processes: source data review and source data verification. Let's talk about each process separately. With source data review, or SDR, the monitor is reviewing the source data critically to ensure that the data was collected for protocol, that it was collected in compliance with Alcoa Plus, attributable, legible, etc., that the PI has provided appropriate oversight, that the eligibility criteria were met and documented, that patient safety was protected, and that the source data is complete and internally consistent. With source data verification, or SDV, the monitor is then confirming that the ECRF data matches the underlying source data. The monitor will do this by marking the ECRF data as SDV within the EDC system. In addition to the monitoring, there's a separate team, data management, who goes into the ECRF and reviews the data for accuracy and completeness. Typically, they review every form, every field, and mark them as reviewed. But here's the thing. A lot, if not all, of this DM review is redundant to source data review. For instance, during SDR, the monitor should be cross-checking the conmeds against metahistory and adverse events in the source. And DM, during their review, will be doing the exact same set of data checks, only in the ECRF. Imagine that inside your company you have two completely separate teams working off separate spreadsheets, but the spreadsheets have the same data. Now imagine you have a third team that is charged with comparing the two spreadsheets to make sure the data is the same between the two. Would you tolerate that? Of course not. But that's what's happening in clinical trials today. You have two data sets, the site source data and the ECRF data, which is a replication of the site source data. And you have three separate processes in place: source data review by the CRA, ECRF review by data management, and source data verification, which ensures that the two data sets are the same. Now, eSource comes into the picture. Using eSource, sponsors can translate the protocol into a site-facing template that guides the site through the data collection process. This template standardizes data collection across the trial, so all the sites are collecting data in the same manner. By doing so, eSource eliminates protocol deviations resulting from individual site interpretation, thereby removing confounding factors. With eSource, protocol compliance is therefore built in at point of capture. The site receives alerts while it is collecting data, not weeks later when the patient is gone. And then when the site is done, the eSource system can surface that data immediately for the CRA to review, query, lock, and extract, i.e. all the functionalities of an EDC system. What does this mean? It means that the data is a lot cleaner from day one. Specifically, we know from a peer-reviewed research paper that protocol deviations go down by 40% when a site employs eSource instead of paper. It also means that the data is immediately available for sponsor review, eliminating most of the need for on-site monitoring and SDV. That means from the sponsor perspective, the site's data is always readily available, and the sponsor knows that the data they see is a full and accurate representation of everything the site has collected. This approach is completely revolutionary and changes the entire landscape. For sites, it alleviates one of their single biggest challenges, the dearth of qualified coordinators. By eliminating redundant data entry and reducing protocol deviations, this technology frees up a significant amount of coordinator time. That means the site team can spend more time on patient recruitment, retention, and experience. For sponsors and CROs, it means a complete redesign of existing processes. CRAs can now do a lot more SDR and a lot less SDV, along with less travel. This obviously saves a lot of cost. Also, CRAs can review site data very quickly after the data is completed, instead of having to aggregate data review every 6 to 8 weeks per site. With faster review, CRAs can detect and correct protocol deviations much earlier, and a centralized risk-based monitoring team can run reports frequently, thus detecting patterns earlier. Data management can focus on data analytics, not on data hygiene. Data management will be instrumental in formulating and enforcing the overall data management plan and running reports to flag risks. The DM as a function does not need to do a second data integrity check themselves. I argue that these data checks can be folded into the upfront clinical monitoring process. In summary, let the clinical team do the clinical reviews. Let the data team do the data analytics. And finally, what does this mean to the patient? This new approach could be a huge benefit for patients. First, a site-centric software platform could incorporate patient-centric elements such as medical records retrieval, remote e-consenting, or telehealth. Imagine the patient on the phone with the site. Imagine the patient provides consent on his or her mobile phone to release medical records, and having those records appear in real time to the site team for review and eligibility determination. Or imagine the patient having his or her own portal with full access to clinical trial data as it's being collected. Second, a site-centered software platform would further promote the industry's recent embrace of decentralized trials. A site-centered platform is essential to enable remote collaboration among dispersed providers, for instance, a virtual PI, a dedicated nurse concierge, a home health care nurse, and a local imaging center. A common platform to standardize and exchange information among the providers is critical, and this platform must, by definition, be site-centered. Third, a site-centered platform would promote patient safety by bringing alerts and workflows to the point of capture. I call attention to an actual incident on a real trial, where for an investigational HIV drug, a woman had become pregnant and reported nausea, discontinuing from the trial. The site coded the reason for discontinuation in the EDC as nausea, but neglected to inform the monitoring team of the positive pregnancy test result they subsequently procured. Because of some turnover at the CRA level, the monitoring team discovered this only after they sent a CRA on site many months later. At that point, the CRA learned that the woman was in fact pregnant at the time and that her baby was now born. A real-time electronic source system that surfaces all data transparently could have easily presented this catastrophic protocol deviation. I am not making this anecdote up. The CRA who discovered this deviation has publicly written about this incident and the benefits of eSource. Does this vision sound too good to be true? It's not. It's happening now. And as site adoption of e-clinical technology increases, which it will inevitably as site networks continue to consolidate. This vision will become the default, not the exception. This new vision requires a lot of change. Many professionals have to unlearn processes that they've mastered and relearn new processes, and that transition is uncomfortable. I can say this, though. Technology tends to go in one direction. When sites go from paper to e-source, they usually don't go back. When sponsors discover they can view site data in real time without SDV, they don't go back. For that reason, I believe the vision I'm outlining today is inevitable, but the question is not whether, but when. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. You really painted a clear picture of how you want this to go, how you see this going, whether we're all involved or accepted or not. I think we're going to be able to take some questions and have some rich discussion around this. First, I wanted to ask you, do you think there are specific protocols or certain types of studies you see being more impacted by these changes sooner than others?
I think the biggest barrier to change is just getting people used to a new way of doing things. So I would anticipate that you would start to see this on smaller trials first, phase 1, phase 2 trials, just because of the sense of, there being lower risk or, less size on which to scale out these changes. I think therapeutically, I'm not sure there's going to be one therapeutic area that's more naturally inclined to move in this direction. At the end of the day, data is data, and as long as you have a data model that can capture it doesn't areas, because everything ultimately just gets translated into data fields.
I would assume that trials that already use a lot of those people would probably find it easier to make this transition than trials that don't use a lot of tech already, and maybe consolidating into one solution would be easier, attractive for those clinical trial professionals.
That could be. Paradoxically, if you haven't, the stakeholders made significant investments in technology, in some ways it could be easier to go directly to a new model. A lot of countries, when they become wealthier, they skip the landline phone part and go right to cell phones. So it could cut both ways.
Right. All right. Well, let's go to our panelists and see who has the first question or comment, and then we'll open up the floor to the audience for further questions. Yeah, you have unmiked.
Yeah, I wanted to hop in here. Can't, of course, say enough wonderful things about CRIO, and I absolutely am in love with the vision that Raymond has presented here for so many different reasons, right? From a compliance perspective, a quality perspective, a safety perspective, and just it drives me nuts when we don't work smarter, not harder perspective as well. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, Raymond, what you guys at CRIO are experiencing as you lay out this vision to different stakeholders in the industry. Like, are you being met with some open arms in spaces that maybe we wouldn't expect? Are you being met with, I don't know about that, we're kind of late adopters sometimes on these tech issues? And is there any particular types of stakeholders, I know you wouldn't be able to name names, that are more open to it and seeing your vision and getting on board faster versus others that you think are just going to take more time, or maybe even have a good reason for being somewhat resistant?
That's a fantastic question. I think most people are not comfortable with change. I think what I would say it's probably more psychographic, right? So, if someone is sort of, personality-wise open to technology and different approaches, I think they'll be the early adopters for this. Structurally, I would say it's going to be the small to mid-sized sponsors first that adopt this. They have less legacy processes, and I think, especially in today's fundraising environment, if you're a biotech company, I think you have an acute awareness that there's a finite budget and a finite period of time in which to demonstrate results. So I think, anything that speaks to cost savings or time efficiency would be very appealing relative to, whatever you perceive the risks to be.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. Before we get to our audience members who, I'm sure some of you have some questions or comments or some experience. So please raise your hand and we'll bring you up to the stage. But before that, if we have any other questions or comments or discussion from our panelists, now is the time.
Raymond, this is Michael, and I too want to echo Edie's thanks and comments there, because I think you've laid out a very, very compelling vision. I am kind of curious to see, because we have been literally certainly over the last year and during the COVID incarcerations that we've all experienced, we've had the opportunity to really try to employ as much technology as we can to increase the connectivity that's here. Do you see the future of what you've laid out here as bringing, I think, the stakeholders in this, the sites, the institutions, the sponsors, and importantly, the patients? Do you see this bringing them closer together in more of a unified objective to get these trials done? Or do you see that there are going to be certain stakeholders that will stand back or get left out?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think part of the problem is that if a lot of the technology is being adopted, by sponsors and being pushed down to the sites, what you tend to happen is what I call sort of proliferation or incrementalism, right? So there's an incrementally new solution, incrementally new process, and with that comes an incrementally new technology that then has to be learned by the research sites, often on the basis of one trial alone, so that there's no scaling or relearning effects. And if the sites themselves aren't automated and don't have their own technology that works for the native workflows, you're not going to really solve the main, you're not going to really solve the problem, right? You're just adding complexity. And I think the cost of complexity now outweighs the actual advantage of any one piece of technology, which on its merit may have, an ROI. I think what you really need is you really need a site-based software platform that really just drives the entirety of the trial from a site workflow perspective. And I think that site platform can connect out and integrate with specific sponsor solutions for specific workflows, for an IRT workflow, or lab workflow, or telehealth, or whatever the technology is. And I think the other aspect of centering around sites, not just that the sites do the actual work, of course, but the sites also have primary relationship with patients. So it's a lot easier for sites to create a more patient-centered experience if they're working with site technology, where obviously the sites have access to the PHI and there's a lot less constraints in how the site can interact with the patient. Through technology, it's a lot harder for sponsors who are almost like separated, right, from the patient to create that patient experience. So I think the key is the site technology piece. So it's the part that the industry has missed, because quite frankly, the sponsors have large budgets, and if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you want to go and get money from VCs, you like to tell the VCs, hey, I'm going to be selling this technology to sponsors, and I can get this kind of a dollar for this kind of a study, and that's how you raise money, and that's the most logical place to commercialize.
I love that perspective, especially when you're talking about PHI. That's really important. So that stimulated a question from me, which is, when it's site-centric and the sites are managing the e-source and the EDC and everything, how do you ensure that PHI is protected and that the sponsors are not getting PHI on their side? How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So the way we've handled this is actually build a separate database for the sponsor. So we facilitate data flows between what the site uses and what the sponsor uses. And that has has a couple of obvious advantages. One is that the PHI is not accessible to the sponsor, period, right, which is a correct way of doing it. Secondly, it preserves this idea of being able to optimize the workflow for research sites, and then being able to optimize the workflow for the sponsors, right? So the sponsors, if we think about building an application for the sponsor, we can say, okay, how does the sponsor interact with the data? What is the right workflow for them? Then we can take that hat off and put the site hat on and say, okay, how do we build a workflow that speaks to the site? What does the site need? What the site needs is not necessarily what the sponsor needs, right? But if you build a great workflow for the site, what happens? You get good quality data, right? And that's what sponsors need. So the two applications come together around anonymized study data, right? So the site has a bunch of workflows. The outcome of that workflow is high quality study data, which can be anonymized. And that anonymized study data is sort of the common data set that the two parties are interacting with. So in our case, we did it by actually creating a separate data table, like literally partitioned data sets.
Thank you so much, Raymond. So we are halfway through our discussion right now, and I see that we have a few audience members have joined us to speak. Oh, and I see that Edie has unmiked. Maybe we'll have Edie share, and then we'll go to our audience members for their questions.
Yeah, I was going to be polite, though, and say Christine hasn't had a chance to talk, and I saw her on mic at the same time. So, Christine, feel free to go first.
Well, Edie, thank you. I just wanted to ask really quick as I'm listening in, and as a patient, I've participated in plenty of studies and research. And what I'm wondering is, how would this, and is there a possibility to integrate this into my current, into what my current care team is working on? And if there is data that is found in different trials, is that able to be communicated to my team even if it's not related to a study? Would that be possible?
That is entirely possible, and that's exactly in our roadmap. We've actually with a site-facing system that can handle PHI, one of the advantages is now you can enable true interoperability with the electronic health record systems. So EHR data can flow directly into the site system, but conversely, site data can go back into the EHR. That can be done because you have patient-to-patient connectivity. At CRIO, we are now able to import EMR data. Next phase of our roadmap is to figure out how to send data back.
And would most companies be willing to send that data back to somebody's care team? Or is some of this information proprietary? Like, what are we?
I think ultimately it's the patient's data, and I think the patient will ultimately have to consent to the transfer of data between institutions. So I think that it's going to ultimately be centered around the patient. Now, how that actually works out, that we'll have to figure out what the SOPs are. At the research sites, we'll have to figure out the SOPs for that. But I think, most research sites are, absolutely committed to having good relationships with the patients. I think that's the other thing. I think, patient experience is so tied up to that personal relationship, right? As a patient to your investigator, to the study team that you're working with. I think they're the most natural allies. And so I think, the study teams would hopefully be very invested in making sure that patients get the data that they need and have the quality experience and that research and care are integrated.
Thank you. Go ahead, Edie.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Great question. Briefly, I'm curious, and this is somewhat, my own selfish anecdote here, Raymond, but I know you work with so many different sites who are with this vision, right, and are embracing this technology. Do you see times when, and the answer is yes, but, I kind of want you to take it a step further, where the site has embraced this platform of technology before, say, a CRO or sponsor they're working with has, right? And so it's almost as if they want the site to go backwards in capabilities because that particular sponsor or that particular CRO hasn't caught up to where and what they're capable of. Do you see that rub?
Yes, unfortunately. I think vast majority of sponsors and CROs, understand and accept that sites have their own technology and are able and have the right to use technology as they see fit, as long as it's 21 CFR left compliant, et cetera. But we do see instances where, an individual from the sponsor CRO will say to a site, hey, that technology is not compliant. And then when you dig deeper, it's actually not a compliance issue. It's basically just a belief that the way that system operates is different from what they're used to, therefore it can't be allowed. It's just nonsensical. So it's something that we always constantly counsel our sites to articulate that they have, the right to use the technology the way they see fit. And if they feel that technology enhances PI oversight, they need to stand up and make that case. Understanding that, the only real source of objection that's legitimate from the sponsor CRO side is either the technology or the process somehow violates ICH-GCP, violates an FDA regulation, or maybe contractually prohibited. I mean, you got to point to something. It can't just simply be this articulated, belief.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Guy, for the question, and Raymond for the detailed answer. That was great. Now we have some time for our audience questions, and first on my screen is Sandra Washington. Sandra, do you want to unmic and ask your question?
I do, and thank you so much for having me, Sophie. I truly appreciate it, and as always, whenever I can join in the OBP, I always like to, OBQ, I should say, I always like to join in. I'm listening as we're talking about the patient inclusion, and as Raymond is talking about how important it is for the patients to be brought in and looked at as key stakeholders during this. But my question is this, as you're looking at this and as you're looking at the patient experience and bringing that experience in, are you looking at, or do you know if the sites are looking at inclusivity where all patients are being, where it's something that's being designed for all patients, or is this just for a certain population of patients?
I think at the end of the day, most sites are, just to be perfectly honest, interested and eager to maximize enrollment. I mean, it's sort of a imperative if you're going to be in the clinical research business. If you want a sustainable, repeatable business, you have to enroll patients. And so I think if you want to have more diversity of patient populations, I mean, that has to come from diversity targets set and established by, the sponsors in response to the FDA guidance. And those diversity targets really can only be met by having the right mix of sites on the trials, because it's no surprise different sites will have different access to different populations, right? Just geography, whatever, it's obvious. And one of the things I think that site technology can do to really promote diversity is that it can, because it standardizes the workflows and automates a lot of the processes, it makes it easier for physicians who are new to research to enter clinical research. It makes it easier to operationalize research, in different communities that haven't historically been heavy in research site coordinator knowledge, right? So the problem with today's largely manual processes that are mostly dictated by the sponsors is you end up, everyone sort of naturally goes back to the same pool of sites, and those same pool of sites are relying on coordinators with years and years of soft knowledge, right? Because there's no automation. You need experienced coordinators and experienced investigators, and so it's very hard to expand that pool of investigative sites. So again, I think if you can get to the point where the sites can really automate, the processes to build compliance in, then what does that allow you to do? It allows you to say, okay, this is the population we want to reach. These are the institutions we want to partner with. These are the physicians that we want to bring into the fold. I can hire less experienced, less industry experienced individuals. I can really focus on, patient recruiting, patient retention, the inclusivity that you're talking about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Raymond, so much for that. We have, I think, a lot of potential with this platform, with this vision, and we don't even know yet. I think probably we have to try and see where it goes. But I want to give a few of our other audience members a chance to ask you their questions. And next on my screen is Cynthia Adjani. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I have a bunch of fans on, so I never know. I am for those of you guys that don't know me, I am a long COVID patient advocate, and I do a lot of work with different nonprofits and now, surprisingly, tech organizations concerning all things long COVID and rare, complex, chronic illness. And one of the things I was surprised about when I was meeting with the post-COVID center directors is just how much administrative work they were having to take on that they had no idea how to navigate, which was causing the very long, month-long delay in our access to care and really stifling the ability to see patients in a meaningful way and in a quick way, in a way that didn't have a lot of redundancies and paperwork that those of us who are very ill cannot navigate. So one of my questions to you is, have you or are you considering doing this with the post-COVID clinics, because there is a very real need for that, including the ones that don't necessarily do clinical trials. At least currently, they may want to do them later if they, weren't burdened by all of this inability to streamline simple administrative tasks. And my other question is, as a person who is on the advisory board of Patient Advisory Board Mount Sinai, have you looked into not just diversity in patient feedback concerning race, but also illness? One of the things that we're doing there is looking at the different rare illnesses, like the one that keeps me homebound, like my reaction to breathing outside air, and my very strong ability to have an allergic reaction to literally anything, including feeling. Are you building that also into your framework as you're developing your patient-centered process? Because I find, again, that while the low-hanging fruit of diversity by race, I consider that low-hanging fruit, but I'm sure others don't, is actually being acknowledged and really addressed in a way that I'm happy to see happening right now. I'm finding that those of us with rare illnesses are not being considered, and there are easy workarounds if you simply know that they exist.
Wow. I told you, Raymond, that we were going to get tough questions.
And don't feel bad, because I work with lobbyists and they say the same thing. They're like, Cynthia never gives me the easiest question.
No, this is good. This is good, Cynthia. It's time for us to think.
It is, yeah. So I love your first question / observation about, as a patient, you actually witnessed how burdensome it is for your care team when they're so busy with all this paperwork, they just don't have time for it. I mean, that is exactly what's happening in research. You just nailed it right on that. I mean, you have a significant amount of time being spent by research sites. I'm going to guess maybe probably half of the research site's time is literally being spent on, just to be perfectly honest, nonsensical things that could go away if we just smartly redesign the entire process and use technology in a wise way. And that half really should go back to patients. And most people who go into clinical research, the study teams, they're motivated to spend more time with patients. So I think we're also missing the second order effect, which is how demoralizing it can be. That people want to spend more time with patients, but can't because of these barriers. So I think, it's very similar to what you just said. I guess the new question, are you talking about, you're not seeing enough investment in clinical trials for rare disease itself, or are you saying that people may have certain disabilities or circumstances that prevent them participating easily in trials that may not be related to that?
That people have a certain set of disabilities that make it difficult for them to participate, like I was saying.
Yeah. Or
that one of the things we also were talking about at Mount Sinai was the other issue of transportation in the guise of not just transportation, but negative reactions as you are going through the trial. For those of you guys that have not followed me, I've had a set of negative reactions in the hospital, and they almost killed me because they don't understand my rare illness in the hospital. And that is one of, in fact, they had me escorted out by security after they they elicited an adverse reaction in real time inside of the ER. And that is the very real danger that all of us people of color know, and it's also a burden we carry, especially those of us with a rare illness. That's an added layer. And so my question was, have you really thought out the adding on a broader sense of diversity of patients that includes rare illnesses, and on top of that layer of diversity that you guys are aiming for by picking certain sites?
Sounds like a promotion, Raymond.
So, to be honest, no, we haven't. That's a new perspective, and thank you for sharing that perspective. I do think a lot of this movement towards decentralized clinical trials was supposed to make clinical trials more accessible to patients in different venues, like in their home. And I do think, and ultimately, we're not actual providers, right? We're purely a technology company. So we can never replicate the work of a passionate, empathetic, provider team like that. That's not replaceable with technology. So we have to ask ourselves, as a tech company, what can we do to enable teams like that to be effective at, enabling participation in clinical trial. And so, off the top of my head, I don't really have an answer. I appreciate, this new perspective that you're bringing, but I do think, at the end of the day, again, I go back to being a site-centered technology, right? Because that same empathetic, passionate group of people that want to make research more accessible and to build strong relationships and to meet patients where they're at, they need a technology that works on their terms, right? And they're not going to get their needs met if the technology is coming from the sponsor. They're just not, because the sponsors are going to select based on not even the sponsor's requirements, but a particular team within the sponsor's requirements, right? And what you need is something that's native to that team. Because when you're building technology that's native to the team, you hear feedback from them. They'll come to you and say, hey, I need this, I need that. And then knowing that you have a safe place to store PHI just makes things so much easier. So if you want to enable, ride sharing, if you want to automate that, if you want to basically order, Uber Health or whatever is in there from the app, yes, you can do that from a site-facing app.
So looking towards the future.
In the current paradigm, though.
Yeah, so looking towards the future, basically. Thank you, Raymond.
Yeah.
So we have less than 15 minutes left, and so in the interest of time, I want to move on to our next audience member who bravely raised his hand, and his name is also Raymond. Raymond, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Thank you so much for taking my call. So I'm sorry I joined the call a little late, so I might have some questions that you've already answered. If I were to put myself in the site's shoes, and I'm just going to describe a scenario. So you have a vendor that's going to push e-consent. So the study coordinator has to go and sign up for that software. And then you have another vendor that push IRT to randomize patients. They have to go to that software. Now they have to go to your service to do the source documentation, the SDR thing. And maybe they have to enter another safety database, because that's how clinical trials are done now, to be honest with you. Okay? So what the sites are complaining is, I have 10,000 passwords, I have 10,000 software that I have to deal with. Have you thought about having something, a total package that can run the overall trial? One place where you can go and you can do, I know it's a big ask, but that's where it begins, right? You can go and do almost everything, including the service you offer. Otherwise, it's just another, and then imagine another vendor, right, that's going to come and try to push the same service you serve. And now for Pfizer, they're using your company who does what you do. And for Merck, they're using another company that does exactly what you do. And for Sanofi, it's a third one. So I think when you talk about patient centricity, you also have to be aware of the fact that there are so many vendors out there that are being pushed at the site. People say site centricity, but actually it's beneficial more for the sponsor, as you mentioned, because they have access to the data sooner. They can do everything. They can see things in real time. it's more beneficial to the sponsor. But I think for the site, it's almost everything is being pushed to them to satisfy the sponsor's needs. What says you?
Yeah, first off, I love how the insights that you're providing, that Cynthia also provided, is just how consonant the patient's needs and the site needs are. Just, I think there's such a naturally strong relationship between them that in many ways, if we can simplify the job of the sites, it'll trickle down to patient benefit. So yes, we want the entirety of the study to go through our software platform, but we cannot possibly build, no single vendor can possibly build all the different workflows out. So the key is interoperability, right? So that's the path that we're going down, exploring partnerships now with NEPO vendor, possibly IoT. We're looking for partnerships with other technology vendors. And we want to be very open. We want to allow the sponsors to take the vendors that they prefer to work with and have those vendors' workflows integrate with our system, because what we can do really well that the other vendors can't is we understand the site workflow. So if you can create a great site workflow that lets the site interact with those other sponsor systems without having to leave their basic site platform, then you've unified, you've solved the login problem, and you've simplified things. Because, if you actually look at how sites interact with these different systems, there's a very defined, what I call entry point. There's a very defined time and place where they have to do something to send data to the systems, and there's very defined data that they get back, right? The whole thing can be automated. And if you can have a platform, what the software can do is basically guide the site to access or send the data or trigger the data, provision it at the right time and place. And then the system can then inherit the data the site needs and then basically tee up a workflow that says to the site, hey, this system sent you back some information, here's your go do. So that's the part that's missing right now, is all these technologies just rely on the site interacting at a specific point and getting data back. But then what they do with that data, the interdependency between that and some downstream action, that's all lost because they're not really building a full site solution, right?
Got it. So interoperability. Got it.
Yes.
I'm getting some keywords here, right? Patient centricity, site centricity, interoperability. So with that, let's get our second to last speaker, our member, Isaiah. If you want to unmic and ask your question, you have 9 minutes left.
Yes, thanks for having me. One of the things I was wondering is what has the adoption process been like for the sites when you're implementing this tech, how they're adopting it?
Too slowly. So, I mean, on the one hand, fantastic, because it's incredibly gratifying when a site says, hey, I use your technology and it's terrific and I don't want to go back. And here's 3 other things that would make my life easier. That part's incredibly gratifying. But it isn't simply sponsors and CROs that are wedded to certain ways of doing things. There's a lot of sites that are wedded to doing things a certain way, and the way things are being done right now, I can tell you with a great deal of certainty, confidence, that are very inefficient. So I would like the adoption to be higher right now. I just, I can certainly accept the argument if a site says, hey, I'm not using your technology, I'm using someone else's technology, and they do this, this, and this. It's fantastic. Okay, I actually respect that. But too many sites are using paper, like paper, prefer paper, stuck on paper, and it sort of boggles my mind. And honestly, if you want to pick a bank and the bank says, we don't have an online portal, you're not allowed to do online checking. We like to do things on paper, so you just come in and you'd be like, I'm not going to pick you as a bank. I do not understand, honestly, why in the site selection process, if a site is completely aversive to technology, is using paper source, I actually don't know why that's not a disqualifying event, or at least a disfavorable criteria for site selection. Like, why would you pick a vendor that tells you affirmatively, I prefer manual processes? It just doesn't make any sense.
Paper does not confer interoperability. That's one thing. So thank you for that, Raymond. That's so true. Next, last but not least on our panel, coming from the audience, is a friend of mine, Doug Sullivan, who is a nurse and a tech nut. So I'm really interested to find out what his question might be. Doug, you want to unmute?
Tech nut. I like that. I'm going to put that in my bio. So, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, I am working with the state of California there's billions of dollars that have been put together for each of the states to roll out some extended care management programs and connect all this with telemedicine and health information exchange and everything like that. And I'm wondering from because I basically in the beginning I heard your advertisement about your application and that each person's data is worth approximately, I don't know, 20,000 or something like that. I don't remember the specific number. But we have...
That's correct, 20,000.
Okay, that's what you said. Okay, good. So we have a big disconnect in our country with our health information exchange, and we're going through the laws directly with the legislation about how that will be approved and authorized and doled out. And so we're doing that for the state of California. And the thing is that the informatics are there. We get the informatics from the state level when they utilize claims that are through the state. You get it at the federal level when they're utilizing claims that go through the federal. And matter of fact, companies have became very rich in reselling that information, such as Optum and Yohannan and stuff like that. So what we are trying to do is figure out how to train the doctors to be better connected with everything, with not just the health information, but the social service information and everything like that. If they are getting what we call a CalFresh program, which is our food stamp program, if they're getting housing, if they have a social worker, things like that. We want to connect it all. Are you utilizing anything to connect with our HIE system? So let's say you want to do a clinical trial and a company's reaching out to you to do a clinical trial on everybody with type 1 diabetes instead of type 2 or something like that. You can extract that information and have them participate in that, because, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to better manage these patients, and we want all that information consolidated so we can look at best practices when it comes to managing that type of clinical disease.
I think it boils down to interoperability, and yes, I mean, obviously, we'll stick to our lane, which is clinical research, especially from the site perspective, but we're very committed to interoperability because we recognize the larger ecosystem in which we play, and so we do want to go down the path of bidirectional informational flows between us and those other health information systems that you mentioned. The API is actually open right now, like it's available today.
API is open. That helps out.
Yes,
because we're trying to validate it. We validate it with technology, and we're with as my advisory services to connect it with remote patient monitoring, physiological monitoring. So we're trying to get these extended care management programs validated, proving that person has taken their blood pressure, that's on a blood pressure medication, and we see that data, or proving that person's gone on a weight scale that has an issue that we need to monitor their weight. And that actually is very, very general, you would think, but is very critical when it comes to care for, like, let's say they're in an assisted living or a senior care facility, monitoring that they're not losing weight and things like that. So, and then there's also the clinical aspect of things when it comes to disease states. So we want to validate everything with technology because we have it in our hands right now, and we can validate it. What we're pushing to is to integrate this information into the EHR. I just want to make sure we're all in the same alignment when it comes to those efforts.
I smell a future collaboration or a think tank happening, maybe, but we are out of time, unfortunately, so we can continue this discussion with questions and responses in our summary post that you will see coming up in a couple of days, and also with the link to the recording that Tia will be archiving. But for now, we need to wrap up this discussion. And I have 4 words to start us off: patient centricity, site centricity, interoperability, and health information exchange. So with that, turn it over to Michael to get us going with closeout.
Sophy, outstanding moderation today, and Raymond, you have truly helped our team here at Clinical Trials OBQ stay true to our mission and our passion project of bringing important contemporary issues to the clinical development community. And so I want to thank you for being both so articulate and educational. We look forward to seeing continued success for CRIO in what really is a crusade for better patient outcomes sooner. And I encourage any of our listeners to be in touch to learn more at clinicalresearch.io, or to connect with Raymond, Stefanie Palmer, or Brooke White, who's in the audience, on LinkedIn. You can do that on this platform. That's one of the nice things about LinkedIn audio, just by clicking on their photo. My sincere thanks to our amazing OBQ crew: Sophy, Christine, Edie, Taya, Scott, and Jennifer. You guys are awesome colleagues, and I love working with you. And thanks to you, our audience. Please join our Clinical Trials OBQ LinkedIn group so you can get additional resources, recordings of these sessions, and join the growing community that we are building. Thanks again to all. Sophy, please take us out, and maybe we want to go round table just for a quick comment from the rest of the team.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do before we get going here. Scott, Taya, Jennifer, we haven't heard from you yet. If you have anything to add or a question or a tidbit, I'd love to hear it now.
Sure. Thanks, Sophie. Well, in the interest of time, I won't say much, but I think that we, as we think about patient centricity, as you mentioned, I do feel like a lot of times we do forget about the sites. So I think that today's discussion was great, and I'm glad to see, Raymond and others really focusing on trying to make sure we're not putting undue burden on the sites. They are such a key part of the process. Sometimes they're often overlooked or left out of it, or maybe they're always overlooked. So I'm glad that we've got advocates out there thinking about that important part of the clinical development process. So thanks, Raymond, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'll just say really quick, I'm looking forward to you solving the interoperability issue and combining all of this to make it easier for patients. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a great conversation today. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have gone around the room and we've gotten everyone's comments. We're very grateful to have had you here today, Raymond, and I hope this conversation continues on LinkedIn, and we continue to connect with each other to learn, collaborate, brainstorm together. And for those of you who weren't able to listen to the entire discussion, as I said before, Taya is archiving this, and the link to the recording will be provided in our summary post in the next couple of days. So we look forward to seeing you again and continuing to learn. And I'm going to close this room unless, Raymond, do you have any last thoughts?
Thank you so much for hosting me. I love your mission, and I love the diversity of voices that are on the panel and the audience.
Thanks again, Raymond.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.